right, welcome everybody. This is Jeff Cantor and welcome to the Freedom Hub Working Group. Today is March 13th and we're being graced with the presence of Jacob Hornberger today. But before we get over to that, let's talk for a quick moment about what's going to be happening in the coming week. So we can kind of give you a little preview here real fast. And we're going to have Chris Freeman on the failure of philosophers to understand economics. And then after that, we're going to have Jeff Tucker on how only free markets bring beauty. We're going to have Berlin Skoka, I'm mispronouncing that, on tranny via technology. And then we're going to have Paul Jacob on the power of the initiative and referenda process. So it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks coming up here. Also, just as a reminder that we're ultimately posting videos onto our own video channel. And so here's the link for it here. And as you can see, this is, for those that are unfamiliar, this is the Brightown, which is the free market competitor to YouTube. So we're trying to support that. And this represents our channel there. And so we're excited for you to take participation in that. And then to continue this conversation into the medical world, every Wednesdays at 7, we also have a webinar we conduct, which is on the cash patients and cash doctors and kind of the shift in what's happening in the medical care out there, sponsored by Health Excellence Plus. So we're eager to have you join it, and here's the link for you to be able to go and participate in that. And every week we have a different interesting guest, just like we're doing on this particular venue. We're also doing the same thing on that 7 o'clock in the same fashion. So that's kind of the background information of the day. So on that note, I'd like to take advantage of introducing Jacob Hornberger. And I've actually known him for quite a while. He started his own organization back in the 80s. I can't believe it's so far back already. And he's really been making some great waves and being very, very philosophically strong on the free market and the freedom-oriented, individualized approach, oftentimes libertarian described. And so, Jacob, I want to tell you thanks for coming today. Fill in a little bit more about your background a little bit to make it more meaningful to everybody, and then let's go at it.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Jeff. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. You and I go back a long ways, and I go back pretty long ways in the libertarian movement. I started out in life as a lawyer, but then I discovered libertarianism, and that sort of shifted the direction of my life. And I ended up leaving the law practice and going to work at the Foundation for Economic Education as their program director. And then in 1989, I left there after 2 years and started the Future of Freedom Foundation. So that was some 28 years ago, and people who are familiar with FFF know that ever since our inception, we have taken a very principled approach to libertarianism, which means that we have always adhered strictly to principle. We think that principles matter, that they are what will ultimately bring us a free society, and that they're practical, that they work and people respond to them. And so that's what our mission is, to present the principled, uncompromising case for libertarianism, and that's what we've done for 28 years now.
Fantastic. Now, one of the things that I think we were trying to be a little bit thematic about was when you did that article, which really kind of got a lot of buzz out there, was the one about, was the 19th century a golden age of liberty? And we see the complete schism of everything seemingly today. It's gotten like more messy than more aligned, it appears. So what have been your thoughts on that, and what kind of are your ramifications since you wrote this already a couple years ago?
Yeah, well, the article certainly did stir up a lot of interest and controversy. And essentially what we're looking at in American history, and this, of course, is not taught in American public or government schools, as we call them, at all. But there's essentially two different ways of life in the United States domestically. There's the idea of the economy, what kind of economic system we have. And we have a totally opposite system from the one that existed, for example, in the 19th century. And we have a totally different type of governmental structure. The government that we started out with as a country was the constitutionally limited government republic. And we've ended up with what we call a national security state. So what my article was talking about was the differences. Now, a few minutes ago, I mentioned that we present this principal case for liberty. Well, what does that mean, at the Future of Freedom Foundation? Well, it means that freedom entails the dismantling of any infringements on liberty. That if one devotes his life to simply reforming infringements on liberty or improving infringements on liberty, he's not really bringing freedom to American society. He's simply making life better for the serfs on the plantation. So we've always talked in terms of dismantling infringements. Now, what does that mean in terms of what we call the welfare state way of life? Well, we've called for the dismantling of Social Security. Now, notice I don't use the word reform or save or improve or fix. Dismantle, repeal, abolish Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public, i.e. government schooling, the Federal Reserve, irredeemable paper money, immigration controls, trade restrictions, embargoes, sanctions, minimum wage laws, all of these welfare state regulated economy infringements on freedom. On the government side, we call for the dismantling of the national security state, the dismantling of the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, surveillance, torture, assassination, regime change operations, all the things that have accompanied the conversion of the federal government to a national security state. Well, one of the common critiques we get over the years, including to this day, that we get, especially with people who are just discovering the Future of Freedom Foundation, is they say, "Oh, you guys are just about utopia. You know, you're arguing for utopia." Well, on the contrary, you know, utopia implies a society that is incapable of being achieved. We're striving for a free society. Now, one may say, but all those things you just mentioned, Jacob, they're impractical. That can't be achieved. You can't ever get people to go along with that kind of philosophy of freedom. Well, that's when I point to the 19th century, and that was the point of this article, that the people in the American people in the 19th century proved that it is possible to achieve this kind of society. Now, I'm not suggesting that it was a perfectly free society. It's impossible to achieve perfection in any kind of human endeavor. Women didn't have the right to vote. There were Jim Crow laws coming into existence. There were land grants or welfare to the railroads, which were filled with corruption. There was what is called crony capitalism, where there's the business and government get together and essentially get into bed with each other, and politically speaking. And so, but if we look at the positive side, my favorite period of history is like from 1880 to 1900, that 20-year period. It is an incredible period of time when we look at these ideals that we libertarians are striving for. For example, there was no Social Security, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no gun control, no immigration controls, very few economic regulations, no minimum wage laws, no public government schooling, no income taxation, no IRS. So in a sense, no welfare state. So they proved that it's not pie in the sky. It's not impractical, that it is possible to achieve this and then build on it. And then on the warfare state side of this thing, they had a limited government republic. If you had told Americans at the time the Constitution was being proposed that the federal government was going to be a national security state, they never would have approved the deal, never, because they didn't want a national security state. So they had a basic army, relatively small, no CIA, no NSA, no FBI, no concept of national security at all. They were a limited government republic. Government operations were almost entirely transparent, open for people to see. So none of this is what we have today. So in other words, they showed that this is not a utopian dream, that this is not impractical, this is not pie in the sky. The point of the 19th century is to show this is perfectly capable of being achieved, but we've got to stick with those ideals in order to convince people, or a sufficient number of people, that this is the way we get America back on the track. We restore these principles of genuine freedom and limited government republic.
Well, that was perfectly said. And so what's our way back at this point? Because like I said, it seems like we're more off the rails than ever before. And now we're trying to get into this crazy juggernaut, at least the way the media purports it, to rush to socialism, which they've done a good job of conditioning everybody to think that's a great idea. What's our solution? That we individually on this phone, even within our organizations, because some of these people on here have the organizations, a la yourself and so on, what can we do to help drive this narrative back to where we should go?
Well, by sticking to principle. I mean, that's the strongest message I ever give when I'm giving a talk, is the importance of adhering to principle. That if you compromise your principles and you settle for reforming Social Security, then why would anybody think in terms of abolishing Social Security? And if they get the sense that libertarians feel that abolishing Social Security, which is a necessary prerequisite for a free society, that doesn't work, or if they have doubts of the efficacy of it, what's the possibility that regular Americans, non-libertarians, are going to go along with the idea of abolishing? Same thing like with public schooling. We've all grown up with public schooling. It's just a natural part of our lives. Well, very few people are going to conceive of the possibility of just separating school and state. In other words, getting government entirely out of the education business, the way our ancestors separated church and state, unless they hear the idea. So if you settle for, let's say, school vouchers, which is what conservatives do, and you say, well, this is just another welfare state program for the middle class, but it's going to save children from the public schooling system, well, then you're not ever dropping the idea in people's mind, and you're not making the argument for a total separation of school and state. So what I argue is the way we're going to achieve this is by adhering to principle. That if you can reach a critical mass of people that say, this is what we want the restoration of a genuine free market society where there's no mandated charity, where people are free to decide for themselves what to do with their own money, then society will shift. And you've seen this in corporations, where corporations want to change their management philosophy. Well, it starts out with 2 or 3 people, and they're very committed, they're very passionate. They start talking to 3 or 4 more, and they finally reach a point where they reach a critical mass. And a lot of times that's less than a majority. It can be like 10% of the corporation, and suddenly it just shifts. Other people just say, well, we're not going to oppose this. The same thing can happen in a nation. You can reach a critical mass of people that share this philosophy, that all of a sudden the rest of the nation shifts. You've seen this to a certain extent in the drug war. When I started FFF in 1989, we were, of course, calling for total drug legalization, legalize all drugs. And, oh, man, I could light up the phone calls on all those talk radio programs that were going on in the 80s and 90s. That's all I had to do, man. People would be calling in to attack me and criticize me. I mean, the idea was just shocking to them. Well, that's the state of affairs back then. Notice where we are now. The shift in public opinion that has taken place really on the leadership of libertarians who were leading the way on drug legalization. Now, people are not there yet, but look how many states have legalized marijuana, and look how many presidential candidates are now calling for the legalization of marijuana. It's not sufficient. You've got to legalize all drugs, but still, it shows you the power of ideas, Jeff, on how you can shift public opinion. And the same thing can be done with respect to dismantling the welfare state, dismantling the drug war, the immigration controls, the national security state, restoring the limited government republic. It all comes about with fierce commitment to the power of ideas, the power of truth, and the power of adhering to principle.
How do you necessarily see it manifestating? Is it going to come through like a la the Tea Party from a ground up thing, or is it going to come through the political means of the right kind of person getting in there, which seems to be a long shot these days?
I think it's impossible to predict. I mean, this is what I mean. If you look, for example, when Ron Paul ran for office, for president, I was absolutely stunned. I mean, I think a lot of libertarians were, that all of a sudden this huge number, millions of people started supporting him enthusiastically. Now, he was a Republican, but everybody knew by philosophy that he was a libertarian, and the press was labeling him a libertarian. He was self-labeling as a libertarian. And so people knew what they were supporting. And here was this mass, like just out of nowhere movement that surfaces. And that to me was telling me, I'll be darned, this is what libertarians have been doing since the 1950s. They've been putting out their monographs and their articles and their op-eds and their books, never dreaming that they were influencing this many people. But that's the power of ideas. So you've got all these people that surfaced on Ron Paul's campaign. And it was totally unexpected, I think, even by him. So it's impossible to predict what could be the catalyst. That I think all those people are still there, and I think this movement is growing. It's just underground, so to speak. It's off the radar screen, but all it needs is a catalyst to come back to the surface, and it's impossible to predict what that catalyst is. What I say is that we just have to keep preparing. We have to keep doing what we're doing, disseminating sound ideas on liberty with the expectation that if that catalyst comes, we will have prepared for it. Because if you don't prepare for it and you say, this is a lost cause, things are going in a horrible direction, most people are statists, they'll never be convinced of the virtues of libertarianism, what's the heck, let's just go play golf. Well, then you've totally lost. There's no way you can win. The only way you can win is to continue plugging ahead, each in his own way, writing a letter to the editor, writing an op-ed, publishing a book, talking to your friends and neighbors, running a show like this, like you're running, that all of these efforts add up. They're sort of like what Friedrich Hayek called the results of human action rather than human design. That there's no big design as to how we're going to achieve the free society. But when it comes, and I'm convinced at some point it's going to come, it's going to be the results of all of these millions of efforts that people make, libertarians make, that are in the direction of a free society.
That's an interesting bit of commentary. I would agree with what you were saying, in that, a lot of people I've met along this path here of late, they first found out about everything because of Ron Paul, and just like you said, they're still around because it was the idea that was so meaningful, not just the cult of his personality, although he was very compelling. That was a big part of it, and it's almost like that death of 1,000 paper cuts, because rather than have that frontal assault against these these ingrained things, we're just attacking from all directions. So that's pretty much right on the track there. So I'm pleased to hear you say that. It's encouraging, because like I said, you look at the news and everyone rushing to socialism on in terms of these polls, but it also goes to show how quickly people can change from they're used to believe in this and now suddenly they're over here. So like you said, just be prepared, and as the thing ripens and that idea comes to fruition, we're going to be waiting for all those people when they finally wake up and run over here. So that's excellent.
Yeah, your point is very good about, essentially hitting them where they're not, where they're the weakest. I've seen, for people like in the tax resistance movement that don't pay their taxes, or people that engage in civil disobedience, and I respect them. I mean, they're standing up for their beliefs, but what they're doing is they're hitting the state where the state is most powerful. I mean, the IRS is one of the most powerful tyrannical agencies in history, and to take them on directly, there's a good chance you're going to lose. But look where our battleground is. Our battleground is in the world of ideas. And they can't fight us in this world. They are totally incompetent in the world of ideas. And they have their own history to confront. You mentioned this drive towards socialism. Look at the socialist track record now. I mean, we've got it. Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, the Soviet Union. We've seen what socialism brings. So if we keep battling in this world of ideas where they're the weakest, I think that's where we have the best chance of prevailing, because they can't beat us here.
I would say not, and actually the political side follows last, in my estimation. Everybody thinks that's where you got to be first, but it's the people move there. Like when you said the Ron Paul thing, just to talk about that for a quick moment, it was so ground up. They came up with the slogan and everybody said, awesome, let's go with it. And then suddenly said, it would be such a great idea of a blimp floating around the country with this guy's name on it. And everybody just decided it was a great idea, and we all threw money in there and made that happen. And the campaign was like, wow, that's fantastic. Thanks so much for doing that for us. And it really pushed that thing in a way that everybody had a piece of the action. Everybody felt involved. And that's really pretty much the only way everyone's going to be committed to our future, is if there's something in it for them, either the pleasure of it or fostering that great idea.
Yeah, that's a great point, because he really ran a decentralized type campaign where
totally.
and it wasn't centrally directed, and so everybody used their talents and their abilities to come up with their own things independently, and it made it a very exciting campaign. I mean, I loved participating in Ron's campaigns. I mean, they were just great. They were fun. They were exciting.
And you met a lot of great people in the process too, and it was so great to find that there were that many people out there that had that level of excitement and their desire to put themselves out there on a regular basis, time, volunteering, everything, which is amazing. And it was all really, like you said, just because of an idea, but everybody's longing so much to get to that idea. And it's a shame we fell off that ideal, like that. And that's a topic of another day. Let's take an opportunity here. We spent about 30 minutes, so let's now open up the floor a little bit and get some other questions going. So if anybody has a question at the moment, please go right ahead. Aaron, I think you had your hand up and you've got your own self muted, so you're welcome to start things up. Byron, I've unmuted you. Rob, you're unmuted. Pranav, you're unmuted. Marilyn, you've got yourself muted.
Jeff, while we're waiting for Aaron, this is
right
David
ahead,
Demarest. I'd like to make a comment.
Just so you know, Jacob, this is David Demert. He's the founder of the Roads to Freedom Foundation, and I participated with him in their Unconvention, which Ron Paul was the keynote speaker at last summer.
Thank you, Jeff. So, Jacob, you make an excellent point that in the political process, we are fighting on the enemy's turf, and they're good at it. And what I hear you saying is that we lead in the world of ideas, which I interpret to be leadership by example and utilizing the education process. I would suggest that our turf is the free market. And our foundation is about growing the private sector and fostering entrepreneurs. For example, Jeff is involved in cash basis healthcare, and I'm a big supporter of that. So I see that actually the private sector is our turf, and we need to take advantage of that in outcompeting the government social service monopolies, and that in turn will feed political progress for libertarians. Your thoughts on that?
I think maybe we lost Jacob. Now it's showing his system is offline. Something might have happened there with him. Shoot. Well, while we're waiting for him to kind of come back, one thing, I don't know that anybody had been on here before, but one of the speakers we had, Dan Johnson, was from an organization called We Do Better. And so this is kind of, to me, is one of the most grassrootsy things I've seen in this process. Because what Jake was talking about was accurate, but it also left a little bit of questioning as to like what physically or how can I just sort of make something happen. And so this organization does a great job because they, and I want to show you if I can find this one page in here. Yeah, this is a good example. So this is where they go through the whole country and they're able to identify all these organizations that are privately doing what a normal government version of the same darn program is. So here, like in Michigan, this Crossroads of Michigan, 47 years they've been in business, shows you what they're providing, cash assistance and so on. But here's the key. They're doing it, putting 90% of every donated dollar into the services. On the other hand, for every $10 it gets paid, which is the government program in Michigan, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, they only get $2.46. It's got 75% overhead compared to this organization, which is the private sector. So just what David's trying to encourage is like general entrepreneurship, but this one's found it where it's more like in the nonprofit type world. And what they're also doing is that they get the organizations in the area, so either the city, the state, or the county matches it up. So if you donate money to these organizations, you get to write that off on your state income tax. And they've been able to shift an awful lot of resources away from the public sector into the private sector. And what's great is that they launched this at Netroots, which is a very left-wing type of a organization, because this is somewhat more of a conservative or maybe libertarian mentality here, and yet they launched it in the heart of the belly of the beast, and everyone there loved it. They've had such, because everyone wants to help other people. So That's the secret too, is getting to the point where you're reaching people where they are empathetic to what you're talking about, as opposed to just trying to throw a new idea there that just maybe throws them off their game for a minute. So David, as long as we're kind of filling some time for Jacob, what were kind of your thoughts as far as, you know, what this is doing in relationship to what you're trying to do? How are you trying to develop that entrepreneurship? Let's talk about you for a minute.
Well, first, we do better is an excellent starting point. I kind of start with a statement that there's nothing that government can do that we can't do better, whether it's in the area of nonprofits or private enterprise. Libertarians are volunteers from the get-go, and just their starting businesses and also their volunteer efforts in the nonprofit world will make the difference in the long run. And it will pave the way for political success. But I would suggest that political success will come after success in the private sector.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. I would concur with that, because, you know, that's kind of the last manifestation. As they've always said, politics follows way behind the people. Just like he was talking about the, you know, the states, first the people legalized marijuana by just defying it and using it and growing it or whatever they did. And then the states kind of tacitly fell in line. And now finally, in the end, the federal government will have to make that move and you know, decriminalize or change the schedule of marijuana from Schedule 1. So yeah, that is the last vestige there. Anybody have any questions for Jacob or any of us here at this moment too? I didn't want to just kind of dominate the conversation. Marilyn, I was going to say, have you got to comment a little bit about, you know, where you see things going on the medical front? You've seen a lot over these last few years.
It's interesting that the speaker mentioned Social Security, and we at AAPS have this whole thing where we think we shouldn't have Medicare, Medicaid, and it certainly should not be coupled with Social Security. People are appalled when I do interviews or whatever, and I let them know that if you decide you don't want Medicare Part A, the government will no longer give you Social Security payments. And not only that, they will claw back any Social Security payments you ever got. People are stunned, and they realize the coerciveness of these beneficent government programs. But the issue we run into, and it's something everyone always says, of course, is that how do you stop a program that's been around for 70 years and everyone has become dependent on it? So the best thing, if you scroll down the AAPS page, that what we can do in medicine, we have a huge, I think it's farther down and on the right, here it is, how to opt out of Medicare. And it's a full guide on how you can do that and at least not be part of that system if you're in a practice where you think you can pull it off. And more practices are able to do it, and the folks can still make a good living. And amazingly, the patients get it. The patients want to see who they want to see, and they want the kind of care that they want. They don't want to be told it's not on the Medicare list. So as was mentioned, that the people lead the politics, but it's a long road to hoe if we have to tell people, well, sorry, a benefit that you've had for 70 years, we're going to take it away, even though you'll be better off with it gone.
Yeah, it's a challenge, of course. Like you said, everybody's kind of used to the devil that they know, then to try to tackle something new could potentially be worse. So there's always that fear of change. Well, one other thing, too, which I wanted to mention, you know, part of the success of executing what Bumper or Jacob was talking about was the idea of being kind of out there and volunteering or doing physically something. So one of the easier things to do is to try to join a lot of organizations like Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, because it takes those consumers, you know, it's like what we're doing, being involved in the medical profession. You know, we're getting doctors to get involved, but that's like one person. But that person in turn has like hundreds or thousands of patients, and I'm more interested in getting to the patient than the doctor, because when we need to lobby Washington or try to affect some societal change, we need that army of people, not just that handful of the independent leaders that are somewhere in between the problem and the consumer. The consumer still has to get off the couch. And so one of the keys is to be involved in this type of an organization. So I would encourage you to join this, for example, and so on. And here's another reason why. So why don't you explain for a quick minute what's going on there? Because I know you're trying to put out a notice as an example. So by being involved with these organizations, you get to find out firsthand about things you should be doing or calling or taking action on that you're never going to find in your normal daily routine or just watching the news.
Well, this is one of the things that's good about being on the email list, and we don't inundate people with emails, but we send out action alerts, and they're.
Go ahead, I'm listening.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. We were filling a little airtime in there. So we were just announcing that the AAPS, what they do is by having consumers involved with the organization, when they send out alerts, that everybody kind of knows immediately what's going on legislatively or whatever, as a way to help kind of execute what you were describing. How can I affect some change? Well, when something's happening that Congress wants to hear from people, and if you don't even know there's a problem, how are you going to make that call? So participating with these freedom organizations is a great way to start to be aware of the separate things that are happening out there. So go ahead, David. I'm sorry, Jacob. Go continue.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. That all these organizations, and AAPS is just fantastic, and so everybody has different interests in this movement, and they get excited about one organization versus another organization, or lots of organizations. It all adds up, Jeff.
Yeah. Okay, we had it open for questions when we lost you.
Measure the progress that's taking place.
No, it's can't. I'm telling you,
Okay.
my measuring stick is when I go to Freedom Fest every year, and to see the differences, the size, the attendees, the nature, the age, who's got booths there. That's how like a barometer of what's going on, and it's pretty unbelievable as time has gone forward, I have to say. So it goes to show that a lot of good things are happening, but like you said, it's just beneath the radar, because once it gets big enough to be found, and I have to chuckle, eons ago I was in the record business, and everybody would become a successful artist in the days before YouTube and whatever, and it was a grind to get there, and they would be quote unquote an overnight sensation. And whenever you would tell some of those guys, they say, everyone's so excited you're an overnight sensation. They say, yeah, they forgot about the 10 years we've been playing at the Holiday Inn. So it has to reach that critical mass. So anyway, yeah, any other questions we got for Jacob now that I've got him back online here? And Charles,
Jeff, can you hear me? This is Charles.
Yeah, I have you. Go for it.
Jacob, for a curveball here, you and maybe Richard Ebeling or someone have done a bunch of programs or essays on some of the deep state aspects of the Leviathan, and excuse my kids in the background here, and some JFK examinations on what happened there. Where are you personally on some of the deep state, whistleblower kind of things that you delve into sometimes?
Well, yeah, I've written a lot on the JFK assassination, which I've steeped myself in, and I've done a long video series as well. I've written a book called the JFK, the Kennedy Autopsy, which became a bestseller on Amazon, and that's an ebook as well as a print book. And then we published another book by Douglas Horn called JFK's War with the National Security Establishment, Why He Was Assassinated. And Horn served on the Assassination Records Review Board. And then I've written a book on the regime change, the JFK assassination, and the evils of the national security state. And we've published a book by Jefferson Morley, former Washington Post reporter, on CIA and JFK, the secret assassination files. And then I've got a 29-part series on the assassination. So I've steeped myself in this and written and said a lot about it. And this, of course, is the deep state. Now, there's different definitions of the deep state. My definition is the national security state, that they're one and the same thing. It's just different names for the same thing. A national security state is a giant military intelligence establishment within the government. Pakistan is a national security state. Egypt is a national security state. So is North Korea, China, the United States, post-World War II. So you've got this giant national security regime change assassination program that all orients around these two nebulous words called national security. Now, within this, you have your whistleblowers. I mean, people like Edward Snowden, that is just disclosing the wrongdoing of the national security state. Now remember, essential to a deep state or a national security state is secrecy. I mean, that's one of their core elements. They want to assassinate people in secret. Generally, I mean, nowadays they're assassinating people in Africa and the Middle East on a regular basis, but in the early days it was all secret. And their operations are secret, the secret surveillance, the torture, and so forth, the renditions. So here you got a guy like Snowden that works from the inside that says, hey, let me tell you what they're doing on surveillance. Well, they consider him a bad person, a traitor, a betrayer, for disclosing to the American people what this totalitarian operation is doing. And it's the same thing with all the other whistleblowers that have been punished. They're just disclosing what a national security state is doing. Assange, that's why they're going after him. Now, he's not an American citizen, but they've already indicted him. That just came out. I don't know what they've indicted him for, but that's the cardinal sin of a deep state, is to reveal its secrets. And of course they lie. We've got the example of James Clapper, National Security Director, lying to Congress, and nothing happens to him. Richard Helms lied to Congress about the regime change operation in Chile. He was a former CIA director, or was CIA director at the time. They just gave him a little slap on the wrist, and when he returned to CIA headquarters, they glorified him, they honored him for lying. So lying and secrecy go to the core of a national security state, and that's why they have no role in a free society. We started to talk about this earlier. I started to allude to it when Jeff asked me, what do we need to do in this country to shift things? And one of the main things we need to do is show people that they're not living in a free society. I mean, Americans are living this life of the lie, that the welfare state, the warfare state, the deep state, that's a free society. It is not a free society. It is the opposite of a free society. You can't have a free society when you have mandated charity. You can't have a free society when you have a deep state. I mean, look at Pakistan, look at Egypt, look at North Korea. These are not free societies. And the reason they're not free societies, they're socialist welfare states, and they're deep states as well.
What do you
Charlie
think?
here. Jeff, if I could do one quick follow-up. Every one of us has a few emails we read every morning. I would like to commend, for everyone's attention, FFF daily email. Bart and you, Jacob, do a great job finding the best essays every morning, divided by category. I look at that email every morning. You want to comment on the work involved in producing that, Jacob?
Well, it is so nice to hear you say that. That is music to my ears. We put a lot of time into putting that publication together, and it's free. We consider it an actual publication. It's not just a newsletter. And we've published it now, I don't know, 15 years or so. And what we do, and here's the idea behind it. We've got 1 or 2 original articles. We have a total of 10 articles that we link to, as well as my daily blog. I write every single day an article, and have for at least 15 years. And that's a full-fledged article. I call it a blog, but it's really a full-fledged article. But we also link to 8 or 9 articles that we search very carefully for on the internet, starting at 6 o'clock every morning, 5 days a week, or we publish it 6 days a week. And what we're striving for is to look for libertarian articles in the mainstream press or other organizations, generally speaking, in non-libertarian venues. Now, we save our Saturday issue for libertarian organizations so that people in the movement can see that, hey, it's not just FFF. This is a huge movement consisting of Cato and Fee and Reason and Mises Institute and Lou Rockwell and .com and antiwar.com and so many more. But the idea is that if we can show people that libertarian perspectives are appearing in the New York Times, Washington Post, that this generates excitement. Now, that doesn't mean that the Post is a libertarian organization. We all know that, or the New York Times or the LA Times. But if they're publishing a piece, say, calling for drug legalization, that's a libertarian position. That's what we'll link to. And the idea is that, look, libertarian perspectives are percolating all across society, and we want to share them with you. Now, oftentimes they're not pure 100% libertarian, and we just leave it to our readers to decipher, read it through libertarian lens. But most of what we're doing there is fairly pure libertarianism. Thank you.
I'm glad he mentioned that. That is really good to be aware of it. And what you said, that's the key. What we're kind of doing to show it's not just like, oh, I found Cato and think that that's it. That there's like a ton of stuff going on out there, and they need to not just pick that one lane, but jump on as many as they can. Charles, did you have a little follow-up to that?
Sure. And if folks on the call, anyone jump in with a question, Jacob is a treasure and an icon, so we have him, so ask him. What events, Jacob, are you going to this year? I mean, after 15 years, you must have some favorite events that you can't miss.
Okay, well, we've gone to Pork Fest for the last 2 or 3 years and just had a blast there. And I just got an invitation to speak there. And so there's I haven't committed yet, but there's a big possibility I'm going back to Pork Fest. We haven't been to Freedom Fest in a couple of years, so we decided to go back to Freedom Fest, and we just struck a deal with Mark Skousen to have a double session there, and that will consist of Richard Ebeling, who's a former president of FEE and former Mises professor at Hillsdale, and now economics professor at the Citadel, and he's my co-host on the Libertarian Angle at FFF. And James Bovard, who's a policy advisor at FFF and has been writing for us for, gosh, 27, 26 years or so. And then Ben Powell from Texas Tech, a libertarian there, economist. So the four of us are going to be giving a 2-hour back-to-back session on aspects of socialism, both in European-type socialism and American-style conservative-type socialism. So far, those are the two venues we got outlined.
For a quick second there, why don't you talk for a minute? Because I bet a lot of people are unfamiliar with the Pork Fest and the Free State Project, and that's executing a lot of what you described.
Yeah, this is a great program they have up there. That it started out with, as you say, the Free State Project, and the idea behind that was to get a certain number of people, first of all, to vote on the state that libertarians want to move to. And so that they took a vote. This was, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, or maybe longer. And the vote was New Hampshire. So that became the state. And then the idea was that as soon as a certain number of people signed a document committing to move to New Hampshire, then everybody would move to New Hampshire that had signed the document. And the idea would be to kind of overwhelm the state with libertarians. Well, it became a great selling pitch on libertarianism. It generated publicity. It continues to do so. And as part of this activity, they organize a summer program called Pork Fest, which is in this beautiful part of New Hampshire. It's like in this valley with these beautiful mountains around, and it's in June. The weather is always perfect, and they have all kinds of activity. It's a great family vacation. It's a campsite, so people camp out, or there's nearby motels. And they have all kinds of things. They have lectures going on libertarianism, all aspects of libertarianism, and you can get your fill of anarchy or minarchy or whatever you want. And then they have yoga classes and dance classes, and it's just one great big fun event. And they have booths where people are selling some really delicious food, and everybody, from what I can tell, is a hardcore libertarian. So we've had a lot of fun at that. And then they also have a winter program up in New Hampshire that's called the Free State Forum. So I think that's it, or Freedom Forum. And I attended that, and so did my colleague Bart Fraser just about a month ago. And it was great. I mean, they have different lectures again, different presentations, booths. So everybody has a lot of fun with this, and a lot of people have moved to New Hampshire as a result of this. A lot of libertarians. So you've got a legislature that is composed in large part by people with libertarian philosophies. I mean, they may be Democrats or Republicans, but a lot of them are libertarians in philosophy, and they're enacting a lot of libertarian type legislation, which means getting rid of stuff. And so, yeah, it's an exciting project.
Part of it was what we were saying before, was to lead by example. So that was part of the impetus. Is if we can make one state free, we can get the other 49 to follow suit. And so that was the one that was closest to freedom, based on all those, no helmet laws and a bunch of stuff like that. So they were made of like low-hanging fruit. So it's been interesting to see how much they've infiltrated, like you said, even before they hit the threshold. Well, we're coming down about 10 minutes left. So I definitely wanted to try to let some other people squeeze a question or two in here. So I, at the moment, have everyone unmuted that it is on the call, so please go for it if you wish. Maybe you've wowed everybody into submission there, Bumper.
That's a good sign.
Well, it's been it's so funny too. Charles and I have been doing these for a long time already now, and the consensus after everything is said and done is that it's going to come down to the individual to do it. That there's no, that was like the sad reality when we were talking about the politics of the Republicans were running on the platform of repeal and replace. Well, how much better is that going to be? Why don't we just repeal and call it a day? But they felt compelled, like they too either need to be in charge somehow of the rest of us, even if it's like in charge light.
Well,
But
I have to tell
yeah,
you,
go ahead.
What were you going to say, Marilyn?
Yeah, it's Marilyn. Before I go, that somebody said, well, it looks like it was up to the Democrats to repeal and replace it with Medicare for all.
Yeah, the Republicans seem to go along with anything and everything just so they don't look bad, or I don't understand why they cave continually.
Well, it's
crazy.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's just crazy how they did nothing when they had the chance.
Yeah, they just caved.
Well, it's because their philosophy is no different. I mean, we've all been inculcated with this notion that Democrats are different from Republicans and conservatives are different from liberals, but actually they're the same basic philosophy. I mean, look, Republicans are fierce ardent proponents of Medicare. When you talk about abolishing Medicare, they have a conniption fit. So, okay, so what's the difference? Medicare for some seniors versus Medicare for all. I mean, there's no difference there in philosophy. It's just who you're going to give this socialist program to. And it's only we libertarians who are different. We want freedom, which necessarily entails the abolition of this socialist program. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it's a perfect example of how socialism just keeps creeping up because of all the problems that arise. The only reason they needed Obamacare was because Medicare had created this huge crisis. Well, rather than abolish Medicare, they adopt Obamacare. Even that's not sufficient, because now look at the crisis continues. So they want Medicare for all. That's not going to be sufficient. There's still going to be a crisis, because socialism always produces crises. So their ultimate aim in this is a full-fledged socialist takeover of healthcare. That's the direction. There's only one solution to this. It's like the same solution that a cancerous tumor. Excise it. And excise means get rid of Medicare and Medicaid entirely. Get government out of healthcare entirely. And then you start restoring what used to be the finest healthcare system in the world.
I absolutely agree. This is Darren. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go right ahead.
Yeah, definitely enjoying this discussion, and I think everyone's got some really, really great points. A lot of it, it really comes down to controlling the narrative. I travel out of the country a lot, and it's always find it interesting people's perspectives from outside the country of how they view America. And early on, I can't remember who it was talking about economic freedom and the liberty that it produces and such, and absolutely true. I talk to so many people that are convinced that their life and this country and this world, that we're in bad shape and we must scrap the system. And it shows how powerful that narrative from the socialist side of the fence, has, how pervasive it is. But yet people from outside the country, they still see this huge liberty of economic value, where they can come in and they can have the freedom and carve out their choices. But our everyday citizens, they're just convinced. They're convinced that everything is bad. We have to scrap everything. Their lives are horrible. And everybody in America lives so much better than most people around the world and a lot of places. And you're right. There is no more difference between the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. It's kind of like some school kids on a third grade playground. One gets popular, and then the other one gets jealous because they're not as popular, so they start adopting the same ideas and the same platform instead of just, like you said, cutting it out, cut the cancer out and get rid of it. We don't need a replacement for most of these things. There's 563 government agencies. Most people can't name 10. We could get rid of a lot of things and get back to that individual economic freedom, that liberty that had made America so great for all those years. When I was growing up as a young person, and the rest of us here too, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point. Absolutely fascinating, because yeah, when somebody is in another country, he looks at America and, man, this is the ideal for him, the pure free society, because compared to what he's living under, it is like a perfectly free society. And the problem is that a lot of Americans buy into this. As I had mentioned earlier, they think the welfare state is freedom because they're free to go on vacation in the summers or something, and they think the warfare state is freedom. And it's only us libertarians that understand what a genuine free society is. And I think that our role in this is to lead the world to really high reaches of freedom, and have the world marvel us as we dismantle the welfare state, we dismantle the warfare state, we restore a limited government republic and a genuinely free society in terms of economic liberty. That's the way to shake up the world, is to lead them by example in the right direction.
Well, and you're absolutely right. And I think, we as America, definitely post-industrial revolution, definitely became that beacon where people were willing to get on a piece of driftwood just to hope that they catch the right current to get that 83 miles to the South Florida shore, knowing that landing here is nothing but, a pair of swim trunks. In 4 or 5 years, they could be whatever they wanted. And, we talk about the deep state. I spent 18 months. I just got my family, my U.S. children. They happened to be born out of the country. They came 2 months early. It was a freak medical thing. And I just got them here. And I spent about $103,000. Now, they're American citizen children. And the State Department nickeled and dimed me the entire way just to get my kids to the U.S. And I was shocked at just how bad, as an American, I was treated by my very own State Department, not my State Department, but our State Department. And we see these things, and being in the Philippines, whether I'm in Southeast Asia or I'm in Southwest Asia, it's interesting how they look at the U.S. and people will say things to me like, "Why are you destroying your country? Why are you allowing this to happen? Because one day I might want to come to America too. And there'll be no America for me to come to, or there'll be no America to give freedom to the rest of the world, this economic freedom, this economic liberty, that we've done so well." And I think about my neighbors across the street, absolutely convinced the world is ending. The president's eating babies in the White House, just everything crazy. People believe this stuff on the news. And it's the narrative that's controlled. And it's hard to convince people against this narrative because it's so powerful. It's that law of primacy, that law of first things mentioned. And anything, no matter how powerful the truth is, they won't in order for them to accept that new truth, they have to set down what they believed up to that point. And it's very difficult for people to do. Several years ago, I was in the Cannon building, and Senator Ron Johnson was speaking over there to a group of us. And anyway, he's talking about a budget and some different things. And somebody said to him, they said, "Senator Johnson," they said, "this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard." They said, "We got to get this on the internet and on Twitter and Facebook right now." And he laughed. And he said, it won't matter. And they said, "What do you mean? Everyone needs to know this." And he said, "This information's been around for years." He said, "I didn't invent it. I'm just passing off what has been true for a long time." And so it began this discussion about how to get a message out. And he said, the problem with, we'll say, conservatives, libertarians, anyone who's not a socialist, right? Anything outside of the socialist realm, he said the hardest part, he said, is we're all about finding a truth and telling others about it. He said, but we all put a different spin, or we shoot our own wounded. We fight each other. And he said, but the socialist crowd, the Democrat crowd, if you will, they will unite behind a single message. And he said, think about it this way. He said, let's suppose you're going to go buy a car and you don't know what car to buy, and you ask 10 people and 7 people tell you to buy a Ford Fusion, and the rest of the people give you a different vehicle model. He said, well, what are you most likely to buy if you're just basing it on people's opinion? And he said, that's how powerful that narrative is. And I see it outside of the country in different things, where the wars, if you will, are won by who controls that narrative. And now we have it being controlled by 20-year-old YouTube stars and Twitter stars and people who are these influencers that 20 years we didn't have that. And so I think it makes it much more difficult. It makes it a longer process.
Jacob, that's a great way for you to kind of end this for us. So why don't you give us a nice little response and we'll conclude.
Yeah, it's a great point, because he reminded me of the quote by Albert Schweitzer, which is one of my favorite quotes, that it's something to the effect that, look, the public opinion today is formed by the mass media. But what we need to do is establish a new public opinion, one that goes from person to person to person. And it depends on the truth of the idea and the power of the idea to shift society in the right direction. And I think that's really what we're all about as libertarians, that particular quote and that particular methodology.
Yeah,
that was great. Absolutely. I really appreciate that. Was a great conclusion there. And obviously we could keep going, but I want to keep our constraints. We're already up past our hour slot. Just as a reminder, the recording of this will be available. It'll ultimately be posted on the Brighteon page as well, so we can circulate that and get some broader distribution and drive people to some of the other videos we're producing. And then also next week, remember, we're going to have Chris Freeman on the failure of philosophers to understand economics. So Jacob, thanks so much. I'll get a chance to follow up there with you at a future date here on some stuff. And appreciate being here today and enlightening us so well.
No, thank you, Jeff. It's an honor, a pleasure, and great to see you. And I hope to see you at Freedom Fest again this summer.